inspire you. I'm just going to go on the fly here, which is what I do most of the time. I'm early in the morning, been up a little while, watched a few videos, just watched something from D Marble, interesting live stream, and then I watched something about Quantum of Conscience, um, who was doing like a rebuttal video to Subtle Infinity. Now, I've watched both of these guys for some time. Subtle Infinity for quite a lot longer, actually. What a deep thinker. Um, but his content has always been flavored or colored with a deep sense that as a an indigenous American, the the responsibility for a lot of the shit that's gone down is due to white guys, right? And as a white guy, that's what I'm classed as. That's always made me feel a little uncomfortable, and I see a lot of this kind of the brown or black skin folks saying that the white skin folks are the source of our problem, and I can kind of understand why people say. I can understand why people say that. In the same way as I can understand why people say that, oil is used to or the greed for oil is used to. Gee, I'm on low battery, so this won't be long. The need for oil is used to motivate wars and conflict and so on, right? So, but that's very surface level thinking, as far as I can tell, and obviously the color of the skin thing is deeper than that, because it's very much rooted in empire and how things came to be. And if you see history in the way that I do, then say the indigenous American story, which we know very little of in the way that the European history is taught, the indigenous American story might very well be the case that the Europeans came over a period of 100 years or so, 15th century, maybe before, but certainly 15th, 16th century, something like that, and maybe genocided 100 million people. And then, my story, if you know anything about my story, is I went over to South Africa as a 6-month-old child and participated in racist acts from the very earliest time because I was white. At 6 months old, I was enforcing racist policies of the government that I associated myself with because of my parents' skin color. Now, what they do in South Africa today is they get people to be angry with each other because they're of their skin color. And now, even though the white man isn't in charge in South Africa, they still blame the white man for everything that's going wrong, even though for 20 years it's been a black man making the rules. Now, I don't want to go too long into all of this. I'm sure if you're watching my content, you're pretty switched on and you know a lot of how the world works. But this issue of color seems to bedevil even some of the most seasoned and well-considered researchers. And Subtle Infinity is an amazing thinker. If you've not sub to his channel, listen to his work, I highly recommend it. But he's still angry because of what was done by the European to the indigenous American. I think we should all be angry about what was done to the indigenous American if we begin to understand the true history of that place and those times. Then we should feel a sense of outrage at that. But equally, we should feel a sense of outrage at the 100 million Europeans, white Europeans that were annihilated apparently in the 20th century through a couple of wars, and we now see those as historic things, and it's only because there was one bad guy, one or two bad apples in the pack, that hundreds of millions had to die apparently. But who does the white guy blame for that? Because that's a little bit of a conundrum, isn't it? You can't really put the race card on that, so they have to do other things like Aryan race, the blonde hair, blue-eyed thing, so that separates the whites into little segments of, you're not quite white enough, you're not blonde enough, you're not whatever. So that gives them that angle still. They can still point to other groups, and dark-haired Europeans can look at blonde Europeans and so on, and with a sort of evil eye. Fuck you for what you did to me and my forefathers because we look Mediterranean, for example. And again, all of this is the dialectic. All of this is the squabble that is designed to keep people thinking that it's me and not some system above me. You see, and I say this to my black brothers who don't think about this obviously in the same way that I have to think about this, because I've been accused of being a white racist, supremacist, and all of that sort of thing throughout my life, because my parents, when I was 6 months old, moved to a country that had imported a whole lot of empire restrictions on people of certain groups and so on. So I had to think hard about that, and I had to evaluate these things a lot for myself coming up. And I'd like to put it to you like this, my friends. If the headmaster of your school, came to your classroom and said, look, we've got something's happened now. We've got a neighboring school has had a fire, and they're going to have to send half of their pupils to our school and half to another school. Now, we know certain things about that other school that mean that when they come here, we want to be able to sort of manage them and help them to integrate into our way of our school. We don't want for our school standards to slip, and as you all know, we've spent a lot of time and effort, putting in place all of these sorts of things. We've spent a lot of money on school facilities and equipment and so on. So we don't want these pupils just coming along and ruining what we've created here. So the headmaster says, look, what we need to do is we need to get, say, 5 of you out of this group of 50 students to work with us to help induct these new people into our way. And what we've done is we've come up with a set of guidance for these new students, and we will show them this guidance, and we will ask them to adhere to that. And if they're struggling with that, then we would like for these 5 selected individuals from this group here to help them stay in line. Right? I won't belabor this. I think you know where I'm going. So in the group of 10, in the group of 50 school children, 10 or 15 of them might put up their hand and say, hey, yeah, I'm willing. I even know 1 or 2 of them that are coming from the other school, or, yeah, I like to make sure that my school is well looked after. And of those 10 or 15 children that put up their hand, unfortunately, we can only take 5 of them on. So we'll choose the 5 that kind of meet with the, who are going to kind of be able to represent school as well as we want them to. Now, those 5 who then get selected to be the sort of advocates or the representatives on behalf of the school, 3 or 4, maybe 2 or 3 of those 5 will take that job so seriously, and with such, and they will carry out those orders and and restrictions with such um, 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 aplomb and veracity that um, that the headmaster will say, "Oh, look at Johnny and Sarah, how fantastic they are representing our school in ensuring that these new students toe the line." So Johnny and Sarah, you know, this goes to their head, and they really like that, and they do it more. And in the group of 50, one or two of those other will think, gosh, Johnny and Sarah have been singled out for being especially good students, and I want to be part of that too. So before long, those that really enjoy being in the sort of prefect or the head or the controlling or the I'll make sure that you follow these rules, or there's a certain payback because I have been headmaster's favorite student. Yeah. For after a while, that starts to build its own head esteem, and people want to be in that clique. They want to be recognized. They want that status, perhaps. So, of the original group of 50 students, now we've got 25 new students that have joined the group. And even of those 25 new students, one or two of them will say, yeah, I'd like to be in that little elite group that the headmaster calls out and says that they're really special and useful to the school and so on. And by the end of the 5 years or 4 years or 10 years of school or whatever it is that they're in, those few who've loved the levers of power, as it were, will want to go on and be the captains of industry and the leaders of things and so on. So imagine that the the leaders of the school, or the headmaster of the school, is actually the empire. And when the empire went to the classroom of 50 and said, hey, we need some of you to help with this integration, that classroom just happened to be 50 white boys or 50 white children, because it was a white neighborhood that the empire was in when the empire started doing what it's doing. But I can assure you that when the empire went to these black countries, it wasn't long before it found a few of the students that were willing to run everything and tell everybody else what to do. In the case of South Africa, it took them a little while to find enough representatives in the ANC who were bought into this system, who were the African National Congress, who were willing to go along with headmaster rather than care more for the luck of the classroom itself, or the people, the students. So it doesn't, the headmaster doesn't really care. It doesn't care at all what color you are. I mean, if you think the headmaster is white because the queen is white, then I would suggest that that would be too simplistic a way of looking at this, because the queen is part of a lineage that comes out of Africa, really. Well, Egypt, more specifically, you know, they talk even in history of there being even black kings in this country, but King John, they say, was black. So in terms of, and then the whole slavery thing was, well, how did black people become enslaved in Africa? Well, they became enslaved because black people enslaved themselves, each other, and the Europeans exploited that. They went in and exploited that, no doubt. It was from the history that I understand. But the word slaves come from the word Slavic, which were the original slaves. I think that if you think about the empire as a European empire, then, which is kind of how I tend to think of it, then it had to start by enslaving the Europeans first. Don't you get that? Don't you get that? The very first slaves had to be where the school was. That's where they first come from. It's those first 50 from which the first 5 who are willing to be the headmasters and the head boys and the head girls and the tellers of who must do what on behalf of the headmaster. They had to be from wherever the headmaster was. So for that reason, it was generally white people who were sent out from the empire, first initially to spread it around the Europe and then around the world. It may also be fair to say that prior to the European enslavement by the royal families and so on, there was enslavement by pharaonic powers in Africa. So does this all happen before Europe is enslaved? Yeah, I think very possible, very likely. Very likely. I keep an open mind about exactly how the history is panned out and how it works, but when it comes to this issue of white privilege, then know this, that it's only being used as a tool. I see privilege in Sunni groups in certain countries or Shia groups in certain countries, depending on who's in the majority minority. Same in South Africa, the white privilege might still exist for a few wealthy white folks, and those who are still attached to boardrooms that are white based and so on, because the white guy is also propagandized. It's not. There's reasons why a black guy thinks that the white guy is his problem, and there's reasons why a white guy thinks that a black guy is not employable in some cases, or not part of the club, doesn't fit in. So those things are absolutely real. But if you can't set those things aside, then you're held up in the construct. You were doing exactly what they want you to do, which is to define yourself and divide yourself simply by the color of skin. And it sort of plays into this idea that some humans are more evolved, more developed than others. And it continues to play into this idea, if you don't mind me saying this, but it continues to play into the idea that the peak of evolution, not that I accept evolution as a theory anymore, but the peak of our human trajectory is, or the pinnacle of our human trajectory is to be in the boardroom, being the apprentice, Donald Trump's apprentice, Alan Sugar's apprentice. And that seems to be the idea of what is the peak of thing. And to be in one of those white boardrooms, to lead one of those white boardrooms, women, they've been doing it to women for the last few decades as well. To be a woman, a power suit dressing woman in one of those boardrooms is the height of our kind of civilization's trajectory and progress. I can't think of anything further from what we're meant to be. That's the lie, you see. One of the greatest deceptions is that what you really want is the big money job, the big salary job with the big car, the big holidays, and the big houses. Now, if you can have some of that stuff, fantastic. But if you have to give up everything, if you have to kiss the ass of the man, no matter what color his ass, then you've given up something vital in your humanity. So while you're arguing to be king of the boardroom, while you're arguing to be like even acknowledged by Donald Trump, Alan Sugar, and every other prick who runs these freaking boardrooms, right? While that's important to you, you completely in their play, trying to scrabble onto their game board and play their game, rather than realizing that that is the game and there's nothing natural about that game. You know, that game is all about shafting your brother up the backside and climbing up his back in order to get to the top, Darwinian style, earning the biggest salary, and your worth as a human being determined by your salary and the car you drive and the neighborhood you live in. That's all what's creating this imbalance, you know. So if you're striving to be recognized by this white man, not me, this white man, the white man who says, um, you know, you know, you are um, you are defined by your educational kind of qualifications and all of this sort of stuff, and you know, we want you to fight for your place to get into this white-based boardroom and so on. If you're playing their game, then there's no wonder you're angry with white men, because they're the white men who are in the boardroom are fearful of the black man because they've been propagandized in the same way as you have. If you're a black man or a brown man listening to this, I mean that by your skin tone. We're all one. There is only one race, and I've known this since I was a child. I've said this since I was a child. But while you continue to have more than one race, your black race and your brown race, or your white and yellow and whatever else, then you can line up next to each other and chase each other down the track for centuries. So I'm trying to encourage people to think differently like that. It might be easy to say, oh, well, because me as a white man, I'm trying to come in defense of the white man's position. Well, I'm an exile in the white man community. You know, I'm an outsider because I've been calling this out for quite a long time. You know, and I've not been happy to follow the party line for a very long time. You know, and I've always tried, I think, pretty much always try to treat people based on you know how I find them. Yeah. Whilst I realize that different cultures, and that often it is attached to sometimes to skin color, but different cultures do things differently and enjoy perhaps different things and so on and so forth. I got no issue with that. I acknowledge and recognize and admire that, or you know, it is what it is. But if you think that the reason that the reason that the game is stacked in the way that it is because of your skin color. It's only like that because we buy into it, because people accept that idea that because you haven't. What was typically done in the past was, you know, these folks from, say, Africa hadn't had any Western indoctrination, I should say, education, and therefore were seen as savage or less human, and that pervades to this day. But it's actually a lack of educational information that causes people to think in that way. And that's across the piece. But it seems to be working extremely well in white communities who think that brown people are the biggest threat to them, or Muslim people are the biggest threat to them, or that you know, black people who think that you know, these white guys are all trying to shaft them over. It is important to realize that all these folks are just deeply indoctrinated. And you know what? In the case of Subtle Infinity, I think you know, there is a reason for people to feel in the injustice of you know, the true history of how the indigenous people of the world have been have been so badly traduced. Now, I lost, my battery died, and I just went and sorted that out. So I think maybe one person actually hung in there all that time. I'm just going to quickly read through the comments. All in all, it's just a spinning ball from Zane. You picked up on that. Another brick in the wall of our prison, actually. We don't need no education. Boom, 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 boom. We don't need no forced control. Zum bum 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 bum. No dogs or cats in the classroom. Zum bum bum bum. You can fast forward through this. That's the handy thing about YouTube and the 10-second jump. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So back to my example of the headmaster. Of course, the headmaster is going to use psychological ploys to discover over time how best to find those 2 or 3 students who are most likely to be willing to exercise the strictures that we've designed for the new incoming students. Over time, they might even be willing to exercise even greater draconian instruction and control over the new incoming students. In fact, they might even be helpful in improving standards with the original 50 students, don't you think? And if you give this example a few generations, you allow for 2 or 3 generations to pass where those 2 or 3 students who have been so good at following headmaster's every requirement, headmaster has rewarded them very well, and their children, 2 or 3 out of 5 of their offspring, might be willing to continue in Pappy and Mammy's footsteps and join headmaster at the monthly Bilderberg. The meetings that they have at the building next door. They will be the ones who are willing to perhaps even go further than Mommy and Daddy ever did, in terms of tighter and tighter controls. And they will be able to convince a few friends to come and work alongside of them and reward them really well. And so the system of control will become embedded. And before long, those psychopaths, the pupils of the original 2 or 3, who the children of those 2 or 3, have had a few generations themselves, and now headmaster finds that he barely needs to get involved. He can just let the students of the offspring of the progeny of the original 2 or 3. He allows them to kind of do what they need to, because they've been able to not only bring these rules and regulations into the local 2 or 3 schools, but actually they've been able to spread themselves to wider and wider areas. So This is how the game works. And psychological kind of experiments that the Nazis were doing is only, some of what's going on, and it's going on all the time in every region of the game. It's just they point it out in some places and say, oh, that's how they were doing it there, and because they were bad guys, and it was said in a language you don't really understand. It was frightful stuff. Just take our word for it. But we wouldn't do anything like that. So I wanted to read some more comments. Racism, misplaced hate, concerned citizen, yeah. And sows disgrace. The truth is live and in your face. Zane spits the lines that mirror grace. I'm blessed to be here in this place. Word to your mother. Concerned citizen, that was cool, man. There is something about being a citizen, though. You've got to think about this, and I want to talk about this as well. And that is that, to go back to my school analogy, my friend, you don't have to be a pupil of the school. I guess this is what a citizen is. The citizen is the pupil. And once you put on the uniform of the citizen, or you become the pupil of the school, then you have to follow the rules. Or the progeny of the original psychopath, the original students, those progeny will be more than happy to mete out some kind of punishment upon your out of line citizenry, and what they realize is that if I pick on you, if I'm the head teacher's pet and I pick on you, then I'm probably going to get some of those 50 in the classroom to dislike me, and over time they might decide to bonk me over the head and say, we don't want you to be in, class head. So over time, with clever Nazi scientists thinking, they devise systems whereby they break up, subgroup the 50 pupils into a number of smaller factions. Let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, 10 different factions of varying sizes. Some might be only 1 or 2 in strength, in number, and others might be as many as 10 or 12, like a very big group, relatively speaking. But we get them to divide themselves into that group. If there is a big group, say the 12, there might be subdivision to be had within that group too. And in this way, we can then highlight the misdeeds of that one in a way that some of the subgroups can agree with. And that way we have, we can almost get them to be the ones who call out the individual who is falling short. Or perhaps even you could get a few of the subgroups to band together to try and affect the movement of a particular group or group of individuals or whatever. So in this way, you actually start getting your head boys, your teacher's pets. You get them to come up with ways to get the class to police itself, such that the class is kind of constantly in a state of high alert, walking around looking to police fellow class people. In the Old Testament, they did this very effectively, apparently, with the Jews. They got the Jews, or maybe it's not Old Testament so much as history associated to that part of what we're told, how the world worked and how Jewish people were brought into line 3,000 years ago, because they were sort of empowered to talk about each other, to tell on each other if they didn't adhere to the rules as set out in the book. Perhaps in our modern world, the Jews are the original group of 50 who were sort of set the task of helping to manage the new ones coming in. When I say Jews, I mean the Jews that look white, because there are Jews that are black, so they probably wouldn't agree with that. But I think they call them Ashkenazi Jews. Some say crypto Jews. I don't know what these terms exactly mean, and I don't put too much stock in any of the history that I've read, because it's very difficult to be sure what's what. But I understand that the face of capitalism looks white, European. So the face of it is European, and when you look at how the system works today, it looks very Jewish in the way that most big entities and so on seem to. If you take the banking and entertainment and quite a number of industries, then the Jews claim to be the captains of those industries. And then even in American politics, British politics, there seems to me so much Jewish influence. Even in South African, the South African story, there seems to be so much Israel and Jewish influence. So, and then when you see the Queen singing, this great and glorious land, and how we're going to bring Jerusalem back to this place, and so on. And then you've got the Balfour Agreement and a whole lot of other things. You start to kind of connect these dots and see that actually there are supergroups. There are perhaps groups who were the original 50, the original classroom, and whoever those original few who went out from the classroom and brought in other groups. I think they had to go across the plain and find the right kind of psychopaths to join in, so they had to look like everybody else. You don't go into Uganda as a blonde or a brown-haired, blue-eyed Jewish boy, or brown-haired and brown-eyed Jewish boy, whatever, and go and call the shots. You have to look like a Ugandan, right? Even in the case of the subtle infinity, which is where this all sort of stems from, this conversation. Subtle infinity is sort of anger at the European for the awful genocide of what was North America, indigenous people. That is sort of understandable, but really, to make it work, I think they have to get some people on their side from the local thing. I think you have to get some salesmen, some psychopaths. I don't mean to say that about all salesmen, but some psychopaths. You need to get those people who are willing to go and sell out their own people, right? I think that's the Trojan horse. That's how they do it. I know there's the story of the blankets, that they brought in blankets impregnated with bubonic plague or some other plagues or whatever, and they used that. And I got no particular qualm with that possible version of history, but I think that it always works well when you've got you've paid off the Ugandan prime minister with a new Learjet and a football stadium in his name. Then he's willing to go along with your plan to kind of dominate the minerals and other natural resources of that place, along with the people. So, you know, I think at some point there had to be that sort of outreach, and from those local places there had to be that that sort of that sign up, because as I said before, you know, the nations that exist on Earth today, the borders that are drawn by one kind of group, and each of those countries gets to operate under license like a franchise. So it may be the case that the early franchise holders were white, and therefore their sub franchisee holders were white, and those sub franchisee holders had to find from those groups of people their own, you know, first tier generals, their second tier operatives, and so on, and they were typically therefore white in color. But the psychopathy that we're talking about here is not a color; it's colorblind. It simply uses color as a tool to 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 divide the classroom, because when you look closely at the classroom, you can find lots of different points of division, and you merely use those as tools for the creation of these segmentations and groups and so on. Which kind of segues me quite nicely onto the idea of the flat Earth as a group. We may be a class of 50, but actually, you know, there are many subgroups within that group to begin with. And while we take on the mantle of the people who know something that other people don't, then we put ourselves into another group, and yet, you know, we don't know much yet at all. So we should be mindful of these things, you know, that the system, the headmaster, wants you to be in a group, okay? It wants you to corral you and corral your thoughts in group thought. And now I've started paying a bit more attention, I noticed that not only are my white brothers in South Africa struggling with groupthink, but my black brothers in South Africa are being ripped apart also by groupthink. And it seems here in Europe, the same groupthink and let's blame this group for that thing in the past. Let's live in the past. Let's continue to kind of hold today accountable for yesterday means that you have to stay in your group in order to do that. So I'd probably happily sit on a platform or a stage with people from it. Well, I'd sit with anyone from any group, but there comes a point at which you're going to have to say, look, while you want to represent a particular single group, then you're going to be keeping your mind shut to the options of the whole and all and the one. And I say that to myself as someone who staunchly represented the flat earth movement for a while, and still do in a sense, but insofar as it's as a means to move towards realizing that we are one group rather than a group of people who can see past some of the bullshit, and versus a group of people who are struggling to let go of the bullshit we were taught. It's just another that's another new division, one that I thought was, you know, long past, because I also joked about the flat earth when I was a child, like we all did, you know. So, I never imagined this was going to come back up again. But I think it's an amazing way to liberate the mind. I thought for me, it was like, wow, if I ever needed proof that we were being completely messed with, then this was it. And yet, even deep thinkers like Subtle Infinity, who found this truth, have not been able to kind of set aside, you know, that awfulness. And I think, let me add that I think that, it's a lot of that resentment comes from a sense of it hasn't really been recognized, and it hasn't, and it isn't, and until people stop pandering to the version of history that's accepted by the Europeans, or some of the Europeans, this won't be resolved. But I would suggest that if you allow for that to be an unlanced wound and you don't let it heal for yourself, then you will continue to struggle with this, and the system wants that. Versus, just like I said, I think that in Europe, Europe, they proudly catalogue how many tens of millions they've killed over the last century or so, and then all the onward lives that were lost as a consequence, that were never born. The children that never got born, the generations, at least two, if not three generations of children who never arrived because their great grandparents were sent to World War One to lie in a trench and die. That's disgusting. And who do I hold accountable for that as a white man? I don't get to call a race card out when it comes to that, do I? We've got to let go of this division, this tool of division, race. And if we can't let go, I see this with my Pharaoh veterans in the South African story. If we can't let go of those angers that were fueled by a system of propaganda, if we can't let go of those things, then we will continue to carry them on behalf of the headmaster. So we should be. I thought Flat Earth would help everybody. Once they saw that, they would go, okay, none of what I've been taught is right. So not only that, if we hold ourselves in the same very low vibration stuff of war and so on, I know I've been talking about it a little bit the last few days because of the anniversary of that battle in the Lomba in 1987. But I use that example of my experience, direct first-hand experience of combat and war, as a tool, really, it was given to me. I never chose it, but it was given to me, and it is how it is. I can't undo what was yesterday, but hopefully I can use what was yesterday as a tool to empower today and maybe help tomorrow along the way, but certainly in today. And I know that it carries a fair bit of weight in some circles, and it carries derision in others. And where it has a value, then I would hope to be able to use it and take some advantage of it, thus that it should empower the voice that I have. I mean, these things happen to us for a reason, right? I mean, if you've experienced racism at first hand, if you've experienced what it's like to come from extreme wealth and manage to find a balance in that kind of craziness, because I raise that because oftentimes people think, oh, it's this poverty that's so hard to come through. But actually, I think that wealth has as many traps. Being of the families that were of the first five to set themselves aside, to be of those families a few generations down the line, carries with it a huge amount of baggage. I look around the shopping malls when I go with the family to the shopping mall, and I see a lot of people who are so pampered by this system, and they're not necessarily that wealthy. That's not, you don't need much wealth to be fairly well pampered in this day and age. People going off to the nail bars and the hair bars and the eyebrow bars and all this sort of thing, and you know, I'm not knocking that. I'm just, but there are people who live entirely in that kind of self-absorbed, externalized, materialized kind of reality, and for them, I say, there is that Bible text that says something about it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven up here than it is for to get a camel through the eye of a needle. And I obviously learned that as a child. And I see that now. I see that as these, and I see these pampered. I mean, they could be on a council estate. They could be living on a council estate getting 60, 70 pound a week in dole. But all of that money and whatever else they get from whatever sources, goes on, maintaining this little plastic material bubble around them, this self-absorbed bubble, headphones on and eyeglasses on, and just lost in that. I think they will have their own really difficult time finding their way to a higher vibration, and perhaps they never do on this journey this time around. And they may never do simply because they were so pampered. However, because they're so pampered, sometimes they end up butting their heads with that pampering, and it forces a review and a decision to kind of recast everything, and that's fantastic. So it's not, but it's just saying that this idea that because you were brought up in the ghetto versus you were brought up in like a rich suburb means that your life is all sorted and so on, means that you haven't understood what this life is really all about. Because this life ain't about getting sorted with a fancy BMW and some bling. No, this life ain't about that. And if that's what you're seeking, you're still seeking what this white headmaster has been selling all along, you see. And you're looking in at that school going, yeah, I want to play on their gym equipment. I want what they've got. And you don't realize that shit, once you enter the gates, my brother, you got to start playing by their rules, and you got to start following all their strictures and so on. And that shit, man, that doesn't jive with where you come from naturally, Nature doesn't really allow for that. I mean, it might be the case that the white European has been under the headmaster's cosh for 500 years or 1,000 years or longer. I don't know. But that just means that he's been more tamed. He's more house trained. That's why he doesn't look as fucking raggedy and upset with this, because his progeny have been curtailed and pulled into line. And don't you know what they used to do to people who spoke out of line? People who spoke like me a few hundred years ago, apparently I'd get dunked. They call it waterboarding today, but they used to tie them onto a seat and dunk them into the water and say, these witches, if they're witches, then they'll be able to kind of save themselves by breathing underwater. I don't need to explain how it all goes from there, but if you think about that, then the thinkers in the European school, the thinkers were eradicated. The psychopaths, the students who wanted to follow the rules of the headmaster, they were rewarded. So over time, perhaps Europe starts to look like what the headmaster's vision of utopia looks like, right? And all he's then trying to do is to get other parts of the known world in similar fashion, right, and pulled into similar line. So it is the case that perhaps for 400 years or 500 years, North America and South America have been beaten by those psychopaths that came from Europe, and beaten by the psychopaths who joined them, the local psychopaths who joined them, and it could be a group. Like let's just say your group, your South American Group A, and in North America, just in a little bit in there, they've got Group B who have already had some kind of issue with Group A. So does it take long to find that shit out and then use one against the other? No way. And that's exactly what it is exploiting, any division, any difference, and so on, so that you can get one member of the class to kind of police and control another. And this is how the game is being extended. And so actually, in some respects, you might say that, the less time that the Europeans have had, or the headmaster has had to interfere with your place, then perhaps the better. The less culture you've had robbed from you, the less of your true identity has been, burned out. So, and it's interesting, actually. It might be worth adding that in the last few years, some of the probably 3 of the top 5 teachers that I've had in the last 3 years have been black guys, black skinned guys. And Subtle Infinity, certainly probably be in one of the top 10 thinkers that I've listened to over the last top 15 thinkers, that I've listened to in the last 3 years. So, the issue of a color, actually, you might say that the further you are away from the nexus of power, the further your classroom is, or further your school is from where that original school was, where the original headmaster and 50 students were, the better. I used to like living in South Africa because I felt like, we were quite a long way from the empire, and we got away with more shit than and it certainly felt like that as a 20-year-old when I first traveled to the UK on my own after the army. I thought, Chivas, these English are far more like well behaved, to put it like that, than us South Africans. We're out there just being a lot more naughty and getting away with a lot more shit than people get away with here. And I'm sure that vexes the headmaster. He wants to pull things tighter and tighter in line. Of course he does. The dragnet of control gets tighter here and tighter there. And when it's not moving fast enough, he uses a little false flag event like 9/11 or 7/7. He uses something like this to bring about more control. More rules for the schools, and so I think there is something in that. So it's ironic, really, that you got folks trying to kind of get into the classroom here, right at the headmaster's first school here in England, perhaps, or Europe, or is it Egypt, or Greece, or Rome? But anyway, wherever it's the headmaster's first class was, you got people clamoring to get in here, and then when they get here, they're like, fuck, it sucks. But they realize that they have no choice but to kind of do the job. I got this friend, Victor, a new friend, Polish guy who's come over here looking for a better life, you know, because things were. What Headmaster has been able to do cleverly is to deny other schools in other regions certain access to money so as they couldn't get the same toys for their classrooms and the same jungle gym for their children to play on. So people end up trying to get back to the original schools where there seems to be more opportunity. When they get there, they find they have to like do a lot of the menial shit that the original classrooms children don't want to do. And but they quickly fall in line, and you know, like Victor, he's out there issuing thousands of pounds worth of tickets probably every day, parking fines for people in parking in the borough, the city of Westminster, or was it Kensington? Doing that on behalf of the headmaster, you know, and they may not like what they have to do, but you know, they need to pay for their school books and their pencils somehow. So they, you know, shrug their shoulders and get on with it. Well, I don't think that that's something that I really I've ever really been very good at. But I guess I'm just putting this out there for folks to think a little bit more deeply about this issue, because while a black guy sees me as a white guy and therefore the cause of the generation's problem and perhaps even his problem today, then he fails to realize that I'm just another pupil in the class, you know. And I know that people that look like me have gone along with what the headmaster wanted, but people that look like you have gone along with what the headmaster wanted. He may have got to my class before your class. I don't sincerely disagree with that. I think that history seems to bear that out. There was a progression, if you like, of the influence of the headmaster. But as of now, it seems that the headmaster has found franchisee holders in every region. Maybe not yet Iran. Maybe, I don't know about that. Maybe not in North Korea, but I think North Korea is a CIA puppet. So that's what I think. And I think that they're more than happy once the franchisee holder in a certain region comes into power. Let's just say the ANC in South Africa, to pick on something I know a little bit about. Then they will more than happily keep reminding their black followers how bad the white guy is. You know, and they will simply use that to exploit and create fear, and you know, in certain groups, and to create anger in other groups, and with those two kind of sets of energies, go about keeping each other under control, rather than them realizing that headmaster is a mother who really should be set aside, because he, like in the game Monopoly, he basically owns the bank, and he can kind of pull out as many pieces of paper as he needs to influence, you know, the Ugandan president, you know, and he can decide to cut off the funds to a certain country and increase the amount that it costs a certain country to borrow said money. This money is all. Let me tell you something, my friends, if you haven't heard me say this before. Money does grow on trees, okay? It's just paper, printed with some pretty stuff on it, but it's just paper. That's all it is, and a promise to pay something for something. And it has become so ridiculous that 2 months of my rent in this house now is more than what my dad paid in England to buy his first house that I was born in. 2 months. I have to work full time just simply to keep the rent, the roof over my head. And there's very little chance I will ever own my own home. And yet, in my lifetime, you could buy a house for just a few £1,000s. And now you have to offer to pay the bank £500,000 £500,000 plus another £300,000 for the privilege of having accessed money that is actually backed by your own value, it's your own credit. Did you know that? When you go to the bank and sign the loan agreement for £100,000, the bank don't print the money. They don't have to go and get the money out of their vault. The money is magically created out of thin air, based on my signature, based on my own value as a human. They are able to extort whatever interest they can from that, while I try and pay back the 100,000 that I've borrowed from myself, essentially. If you don't know how the banking scam works, then I really recommend doing some research, independent research into that. But the headmaster has got the whole system rigged that makes it almost impossible for the average guy to ever rise above being a hard-working, having to go into the office suit and tie or whatever, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week in order simply to keep the roof and the food coming. Well, that's all a scam. That's all like an energy sapping scam designed to rob you of a whole lot of stuff, no matter which classroom you start in, my friends. So, it's really time for people to grow up and realize, maybe that's not the right phrase, I don't mean to be insulting. Maybe it's time for people to wise up and realize we truly are one human race. Don't be talking about, we're one human race, but you want to think in terms of those white boys or those black boys. Yeah. You're lying to yourself. There is only one human race. Yes, we look different and we think different from one group to another, depending on where we live and what our social construct has been. But really, we're all the same, and beneath those surface things, we're all the same, and we're all one, and we've all been messed with by the headmaster. So the sooner you get a hold of that idea, the sooner we can all kind of band together and say, well, can't we do this very, very, very differently? And I mean very, very differently, People have this idea that there's such scarcity that we can't have land, we can't have, vast access to, the things that we need to kind of live a glorious life. Not one in which we're all running around in Ferraris, trying to chase each other down around Hyde Park. No, I mean, something far more glorious. But you see, we will only get to that when we realize how glorious we are in a truly divine way, rather than, the headmaster's pet kind of way, which is really what most people who are trying to get into the system are trying to be, teacher's pet. If I appease my employer, then I will get the bonus and the performance-related pay and the increase and maybe some status update. And so while we're in that construct, everybody's going off to class and everyone's learning how important that stuff is, then yes, you're going to continue to play that game of them versus us in the color group or in the gender group or in the gender group. I should talk about that, but not now. Anyway, I hope this has been useful. I've rabbited on for quite some time now. I think I should let it go. And I've had a few thumbs up, which is nice. I'll just say a few hellos before I go. What is that guy saying? Muhammad says controlled opposition. I wonder if you think that's me. Do you think that Jerusalem, this might help, is related to the third temple and the Antichrist? Yeah, I think the governments are... This is a guy called Muhammad Akbar. My eyesight's not fantastic. Do you think the governments are aligning against Abrahamic religions, or is it a form of control? And what do you think about Jesus, Antichrist? Yeah, I'm going to answer this. I mean, I'm not sure whether you mean controlled opposition is me. I think Critical Inception asks, is it flat Earth known in South Africa? There's a few flat Earth folk who in South Africa that I know of, but actually the last proper South African president, he may have been a control puppet, to be fair, but his name is oh my God, my mind's gone blank. Jesus. I do apologize for that blasphemy and my dropping a memory. Now, there was a South African president back before, while South Africa was still before the British came in and robbed South Africa with the two Boer Wars back in the 1899, 1903, 1904 period, something like that. South Africa, the British came and set up their first concentration camps, and one of them was in my hometown. I never knew about this until a few years ago. I went through all my history class, and they never told me that a concentration camp had been set up in my hometown. That's because the British are writing the history that we read. Well, I'd say the Empire, the headmaster's favorite children. But the president prior to that said the earth was flat. Shit, his name escapes me. But I wanted to deal with Muhammad. I mean, see, I think that the Abrahamic, he's asked this question, so do I think that the governments are aligning against Abrahamic religions, or is it a form of control? And what do you think about Jesus, Antichrist? Let me just go straight to the punch on this, and that is that I think that you are Jesus. I think that the Christ is in each of us. Or Muhammad's prophet capabilities, what he was saying or whatever, I think that's in each of us. I think the Abrahamic religions are doing everything that they can to rob you of that truth. And they may allow it for the deep occult knowledge. People know this stuff, of course, but for the average pupil of the school, no, they don't want you to know this, because if you know this, then you will tell the headmaster to fuck off. So I think that the Abrahamic religions are all about messing with people, and they have simply used what they knew was areas of division to create these points of difference between the grandfather, Judaism, the son, Christianity, and the grandson, Islam. But the governments were set up by the same people who are the grandfathers of, or who are the headmaster of, the religions. The most public face of this would be, say, from the Vatican. But probably wouldn't be fair just to pick on Christianity as the one. I mean, it's easier for me to pick on it because I come from that. So, it's, like if I pick on Islam, people go, "Oh, the fuck are you talking about?" The Muslims kind of get. It's just the same as a black guy goes, "Why is a white guy talking about me? I don't want to hear what a white guy. What do they call me? Devil. I don't want to hear what a devil has to say about me." See, because this is their mindset, is that I'm not one of them because I'm not a brother, because my skin ain't black. You see, and they call me a racist. I don't align myself with the likes of Tommy Robinson, these other white sort of we're white and we have to protect ourselves from the other. That's just another brick in the wall thinking, Donald Trump's wall. And this is how they push and the pull. So what the governments, getting back to your question, what the governments want is they want the dialectic, they want the squabble. They're all about in sowing dissent. They're all about keeping people apart from each other. They've got to pretend to be like trying to do the right thing by humanity, but because they need you to come and vote for them, right? So they got to make sure that the classroom is being handed out with sweets, particularly a few days before elections. And you see this in South Africa, actually. I've got African people tell me that sometimes before an election, a little while before an election, the local, regional, provincial dude will kind of come around in a cavalcade of limousines and whatnot and throw out a few bags of flour and rice and whatnot and buy off a few local voters. So, it's about keeping people. It's about keeping people in that state of tension. But religion, remember, what's your name again? Muhammad. Tommy's controlled here. Yeah, I've been watching Tommy for a few years. I don't, I see, and I'll put these two. There's a group called Gang in London, black guys who are, legitimately maybe trying to go around, do good things in their neighborhood. And then there's a guy called Tommy Robinson who used to run a group called English Defence League, EDL. And then he sort of suddenly just upped his sticks and left the group. And then I saw him aligned with a Muslim called not Sadiq Khan, that's the mayor. Whose name escapes me right now. My memory is a little bit of shit this morning, but he joined a group called the Quilliam Foundation, and that was like a Muslim kind of funded group, and that was an interesting turn. And then, of course, this whole business of him happening to be, rebel media's kind of darling and getting to be right on scene as a terrorist event occurs on Westminster, in London, right? If you believe that. It's an REM song I came across again recently the other day. I love it, and I've been singing it to myself. It goes like this. And if you believe they put a man on the moon, and if you believe there's nothing real, nothing at all. Now, I can't remember all the lyrics, but it's a fantastic REM tune that's like singing about a guy called Andy Kaufman, and you need to look into that shit. It's pretty amazing. They know that they never went to the moon, and, they're telling people. But I lost my thread now. What a dick. The Quilliam Foundation and Tommy Robinson and Gang, a bunch of black guys who are perhaps trying to do good but not realizing. I think that guys who follow Tommy Robinson are in the main probably trying to do good. They're probably family men. They're probably trying to, keep the roof over their heads, a bit like me. And seeing the undermining of their, perhaps they're blaming the undermining of their earning potential or job opportunities on migrants coming in. But like all of these folks, they don't realize that the migrants are being shipped in by the government. They're being, and I don't mean necessarily literally given a ship by the government, but I think that in some cases they are, through clandestine means. But certainly what our governments are doing is they're in those countries often meddling, and they have been doing so since teachers first sent those 5 students out from the original class and started to meddle. If you look into how the Jesuits seem to operate, they do this very thing, and there's plenty of historical accounts of the Jesuits being, expelled from countries and regions because of their underhanded methods of trying to get people on board and to curry favor with the powerful, or to use techniques of blackmail or whatever to get people to toe the line. So that's in the first instance, is that we're blaming the wrong party, and that's what those in charge want you to do, is to blame the other students in the class. Then the other point is that oftentimes, most times, I think these groups, including the Flat Earth group, get funded by these same very headmasters' favorite students, psychopaths, to go out and do good works on behalf of the psychopath. Sounds like my little boy's going to join me in a second. Hey, hey. Look, I'm going to have to rock and roll. But I hope that that's been helpful, and I hope that that kind of makes some kind of sense. And hello, Zizi. And I will continue the stream in time to come.